There is a reason why so many people study consciousness, manifestation, and personal growth, yet remain emotionally exhausted. It's not a lack of knowledge. It is because their emotional system is still running on survival mode. Survival emotions were never designed to fuel expansion. They exist to protect, to react, and to endure. Fear, urgency, guilt, control, and constant hypervigilance might keep you alive, but they cannot propel you forward. At a certain point in your evolution, the problem is no longer what you think. It becomes what your emotional field silently repeats every single day. Because consciousness does not evolve through ideas alone. It evolves when your emotions stop anchoring your system to the past. Today's journey is not about repressing feelings or forcing positivity. It is about crossing the invisible threshold between surviving and evolving. When the function of your emotions changes, reality changes how it responds. Welcome back. The path continues. The wagon continues its steady movement. No bumps, no rush, no tension. The ride is smooth because everything is in coherence. The quantum architect watches in silence for a moment before speaking. Not to build suspense, but to let every passenger realize exactly where they are sitting. Look around the wagon. You recognize the faces. It's the kind of gathering that would only happen here, or in a very complicated philosophy exam. There is Carl Jung watching the invisible symbols organizing your unconscious. Carl Rogers, holding the field of radical authenticity. Alan Watts, with that serene look, probably amused that we are still trying so hard to figure it out. Jordan Peterson, sitting straight, reminding us that chaos requires order and responsibility. And Hélio Couto, integrating all of this with a deep understanding of subtle fields and vibrational physics. They aren't here to teach you something new. They are here to help reveal what you have already understood intellectually, but haven't quite digested yet. If you made it this far, something shifted. You learned that force doesn't create reality, it creates resistance. You learned that money isn't a spiritual enemy. It's just organizing energy for survival. You learned that you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. These past videos weren't just episodes to binge watch, they were rungs on a ladder. First, understanding, then observation, identity, neutrality, coherence. Without that foundation, what comes next would crush you. But here is where most people stall. They don't stop because they failed. They stop because they fall into the smart person's trap. They believe that understanding the concept is the same as evolving. This is where the quantum architect stands up. He doesn't speak with an alarm, he speaks with the cold accuracy of truth. There is a hard limit to where your consciousness can go while your emotions are still addicted to survival mode. You can quote Alan Watts on flow while your cortisol levels are screaming emergency. You can understand the observer effect but still react out of terror. You can study identity shifting while operating from deep-seated guilt. You can preach prosperity while holding your breath in constant internal tension. As long as this happens, the evolutionary movement is incomplete. It's a glitch in the system. Emotions aren't just feelings. They are the invisible infrastructure. Thoughts organize the map. Emotions organize the magnetic field. Here is what most gurus forget to mention. Survival emotions aren't bad or negative. They are functional. They kept your ancestors from being eaten. They are great for focus, reaction, and defense. But trying to use survival emotions to access higher evolution is like trying to run quantum software on Windows 95. It simply crashes. This creates the silent conflict so many of you feel. That sensation of being almost there. You study, you journal, you meditate, you apply the techniques, yet you feel heavy, exhausted, like you're running on a treadmill. It's not a lack of discipline. It's not a lack of faith. It's not a lack of IQ. It is emotional incoherence. The quantum wagon doesn't stop here. but it slows down just enough for you to get the point. The next crossing doesn't happen in your brain, it happens in your emotional field. Everything up to now was preparation. We were removing the noise, asking you to stop fighting, asking you to stop chasing. Now, the question isn't what do you know? The question is, what fuel is currently in your tank? Because as long as fear, urgency, control, and hypervigilance are your main engines, the system will keep spinning in circles. You'll just be more aware that you are spinning. The journey starting now is different. It doesn't ask for effort, it asks for brutal honesty. The honesty to admit that surviving is not the same as evolving. If you are still here, it's not by accident. This wagon only carries those ready to cross the next threshold. The architect returns to his seat, the speed picks up, and one thing becomes clear. From this point on, if you don't reorganize your emotional field, you cannot move forward, not as a punishment, but simply because physics demands coherence. The journey continues. The wagon continues its course, traversing landscapes that shift slowly outside the windows, while the exterior scenery seems vast, silent, and almost stable. Something inside the cabin demands careful attention. The quantum architect is no longer just looking at faces. He is observing bodies, scanning the posture and breath of every passenger to detect the degree of invisible tension that remains even when no one is speaking. There is an aspect of this journey that is rarely addressed with clarity because most people believe emotions are merely mental events, like pop-up notifications in the brain that appear, fade, and can be deleted with positive thinking. But the body knows something the mind chooses to ignore. Emotions are physiological states organized over time, not just fleeting reactions to a bad day. They install themselves as a permanent operating system when a specific lifestyle is repeated long enough. Survival mode does not live in your thoughts, it lives in your biology. It manifests as shallow breathing, fragmented attention, the inability to relax without feeling guilty, and that nagging, constant sensation that something needs to be fixed before you are allowed to rest. Even when your life looks fine on paper, your system remains in high readiness. Let's be clear, this isn't a personal failure. It is a brilliant adaptation. At some point in your history, this state was necessary. Perhaps you needed extreme focus, endurance, or emotional hypervigilance to get through a tough period. Your body learned that relaxing was dangerous, and like a diligent student, it memorized that lesson perfectly. The problem arises when this temporary state becomes the permanent wallpaper of your existence. At this stage, your mind might be listening to podcasts about flow and presence, but your body is still operating as if it's waiting for the next bomb to drop, the next bill to arrive, or the next criticism to land. This disconnect consumes energy silently, which explains why so many people feel completely drained without having done any physical labor. The exhaustion doesn't come from action, but from the continuous maintenance of an alarm system that never shuts off. Looking around the wagon, the mentors see this clearly. Alan Watts tilts his head slightly, looking like someone watching a child try to push a river upstream. Jung recognizes the archetypal soldier who doesn't realize the peace treaty was signed years ago. Rogers sees the painful misalignment between the peace you seek and the war you sustain. Peterson understands that responsibility without rest eventually collapses into crushing weight. And Hélio Couto observes the vibrational field being constantly pulled back down into density. This is not judgment, it is simply a system diagnostic. As long as the body remains on alert, the dominant emotion is containment, not creation. Because a system obsessed with protection has no resources left for expansion. Here is the decisive point of the journey. You cannot climb evolutionary steps while wearing the same emotional armor that was necessary to survive the previous levels. Your consciousness may crave expansion, but if your body is committed to defense, this internal conflict won't generate movement. It will only generate friction and burnout. Before we move forward, there is something simple yet essential that must be perceived. Not with the mind, but with somatic awareness. Exercise, recognizing the alert state. Don't try to change anything right now, just observe. Close your eyes for a few moments and bring your attention to your breathing. Notice if it is deep and rhythmic or short and shallow. Notice if your abdomen moves freely or if it remains tight and contained. Scan your body for any region holding tension without any immediate physical need. Do not correct it, do not force relaxation, and do not judge it. Just recognize it. This recognition is not an exercise in control. It is an exercise in radical honesty with the current state of your system. Only what is seen with absolute clarity can eventually reorganize itself. If this content is helping you spot the invisible walls you've been bumping into, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Many of the steps we are crossing here were prepared in previous videos, and others are coming to sustain this transition with depth and stability. The wagon moves on. In the next stretch of the journey, something begins to reveal itself with sharper precision. There is a fundamental difference between emotions that react to the world and emotions that organize the field from within, and that difference changes everything. The wagon enters a region where the landscape opens up. There is less noise, less visual clutter, and less urgency. The movement remains steady, but the perception shifts. Not because the external world has transformed, but because the observer is finally seeing differences that previously went unnoticed. Here lies a distinction that changes the game. Not all emotions operate on the same logic. Some are immediate reflexes to the environment, while others are born from an organized internal state. This subtle difference is the key to understanding why some patterns repeat endlessly like a broken record, while others dissolve naturally. The reactive emotions, the ones most people live in 90% of the time, are shaped by impact. They appear after something happens, a rude comment, a stressful email, a sudden noise, or a memory triggers the system to defend, adjust, or attack. This mechanism is fast, efficient, and absolutely brilliant if you are running from a predator in the wild. However, there is an invisible tax you pay when this temporary survival mechanism becomes your permanent lifestyle. When your emotions are always a reaction, your internal field becomes entirely dependent on the external world. You are essentially outsourcing your emotional state to your environment. If the traffic is bad, you are angry. If the news is scary, you are fearful. If your boss is moody, you are anxious. Reality becomes something that happens to you, not something that emerges from you. In this mode, even your conscious decisions are tainted by old biological programs. Your intention might be new, but your emotional engine is an antique. Jung sees this as the endless repetition of complexes. Watts sees the illusion of being separate from the flow. Rogers notices the painful gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. Peterson sees a lack of structural order, and Hélio Couto observes a vibrational field that is constantly being hacked by external stimuli. It's like living life as a ball in a pinball machine. Lots of movement, lots of noise, but zero control over the direction. In stark contrast, there is a second type of emotion, the evolutionary emotion. These do not react, they organize. They don't wait for a good event to happen in order to exist. They establish the baseline terrain upon which events can manifest. We are talking about calm not as the absence of problems, but as internal stability. Confidence, not as naive optimism, but as sustained coherence. Clarity, not as mental control, but as the alignment between body, emotion, and intention. These emotions are not flashy or hysterical, they are consistent, and because they lack the adrenaline spike of drama, many people addicted to the high of survival mode mistake this stability for boredom or apathy. The system, accustomed to constant alerts, interprets peace as being dead, but in reality, this is a higher level of organization. While reactive emotions burn fuel to fight the world, evolutionary emotions free up energy to create conscious movement. This shift completely alters how reality responds to you. It's not that the universe suddenly decides to obey your mood. It's that your internal field stops sending contradictory signals. You stop asking for expansion while broadcasting fear. You stop praying for flow while holding on to rigidity. You stop chasing abundance while vibrating in emotional scarcity. Crossing the bridge between these two logics isn't a rational decision. You can't just think your way out of a feeling. It happens when the system realizes it no longer needs to be armed for battle 24/7. Everything we have covered so far, observing thoughts, reducing interference, dropping the chase, stabilizing money, integrating identity, was designed to lower the noise so you could hear this new signal. The wagon doesn't speed up, it simply stays the course. But now everything aligns from the inside out. As we move to the next stretch, the inevitable question arises: if evolutionary emotions don't react to the world, how exactly do we build them? That is what we explore next. The wagon now crosses a stretch where the movement is barely felt, not because it stopped, but because it became stable enough to require no constant attention. Everything continues happening, but without the effort of monitoring that once seemed necessary. This is one of the clearest signs that something has changed structurally. Coherence stops being something you chase in a weekend workshop and becomes your baseline state, not as emotional perfection, but as an internal organization that does not crumble easily under life variations. Here, a distinction must be made. Coherence does not mean the absence of intense emotions. It does not mean turning into a robot. It means that no single emotion takes over the command center. Everything can be felt, but nothing dominates. When this stage begins to solidify, everyday life offers subtle but consistent signs. Consider a common scenario, a disagreement in a close relationship. Before the body would react instantly, the cortisol would spike. The need to explain yourself, defend your point, or win the conversation appeared automatically. Even when the dialogue ended, something remained reverberating for hours, sometimes days. Now the scenario is different. The disagreement still happens, the emotion still rises, but it does not hijack the system. There is enough internal space to listen, respond, and even disagree without losing presence. The body does not enter max alert. The breath does not fragment. The identity does not feel threatened. The conversation flows. The point is made. The boundary is held. And at the end, the system returns naturally to equilibrium. There was no repression. There was no white-knuckling to stay calm. There was simply enough coherence not to turn a 10-minute moment into a 3-day internal crisis. This is the sign that coherence stopped being a practice and became a condition. Jung would recognize here the real integration of what was once projected. Rogers would observe the congruence between experience and expression. Watts would remind us that nothing had to be pushed for the flow to continue. Peterson would see the capacity to sustain emotional responsibility without rigidity. Hélio Couto would perceive a field that no longer oscillates violently with every external stimulus. This stability does not come from a single decision. It is built by the compound interest of silent choices over time. Every time the system navigates a situation without returning to extreme alert, something real. Every time an emotion is felt without being fought or dramatized, something integrates. Every time a response emerges without urgency, something consolidates. Coherence gets stronger simply because it is no longer being threatened. At this point in the journey, something important happens. You stop constantly asking yourself if you are aligned. That question loses relevance because alignment no longer depends on continuous checking. It expresses itself naturally in how you act, decide, and respond. Life continues to present challenges. that they no longer require a complete internal reconstruction every time they occur. The wagon moves on. In the next and final stretch of this journey, something even deeper presents itself. There is a moment when the system not only sustains coherence, but begins to fully trust it. That is where the crossing is completed. The wagon moves forward, and for the first time since the journey began, the external movement seems to cross into denser regions. Distant cities appear, along with structures, schedules, and routines. The landscape starts to look familiar. It is as if the track is finally touching the territory where everyday life actually happens. This is a delicate point in the crossing. Many people can experience evolutionary emotions in specific moments, in silence, during meditation, or while consuming content that organizes consciousness. But they feel something is lost the moment they return to the demands of the grind. This happens not because the state was fake, but because it has not been integrated into practical life yet. Sustaining evolutionary emotions does not mean living in a cave away from the world. It means operating in the world without allowing it to constantly rewrite your internal code. Here is a common misconception that needs to be dismantled. Evolutionary emotions do not require perfect conditions. They require just enough coherence to prevent your system from automatically reverting to old reflexes when the pressure hits. Consider a simple everyday scenario. A person who has started reorganizing their internal state decides to handle their finances more consciously. They no longer live in constant urgency. They no longer associate money with a threat. They no longer feel guilty for resting. But then they open their banking app and see an unexpected charge. Immediately the body contracts, the breath shortens, the thoughts race. The old impulse rises instantly. Fix it now. Cut all pleasure. Anticipate the worst-case scenario. Return to rigid control. In this precise moment, it is not the financial situation that defines your next evolutionary step. It is the emotional response that follows. Sustaining evolutionary emotions does not mean ignoring the problem. It means responding without handing the keys over to survival mode. The difference is subtle, but it is decisive. Instead of reacting, the system stays present. It recognizes the contraction without merging with it. It evaluates the situation without artificial urgency. It acts with clarity, not with fear. The external world continues to demand decisions. What changes is the state from which those decisions are made. This is how evolutionary emotions are solidified, not by the absence of challenges, but by the permanence of coherence during them. Alan Watts would say, the river does not stop flowing just because it meets a rock. Jung would observe that a complex only loses power when you stop feeding it. Rogers would remind us that congruence does not depend on comfort. Peterson would point out that responsibility without panic is the definition of maturity. And Hélio Couto would recognize that the field stabilizes when it stops reacting to every oscillation. All of this converges to one point. The evolutionary emotion does not need to be protected. It needs to be chosen repeatedly until it is no longer a choice but a default setting. In this process, the system learns something new, that it is not necessary to lose presence to solve problems, that panic is not a strategy, that you do not need to return to tension to remain functional. This learning happens in micro-decisions. I invite you to do this exercise, sustaining coherence under real stimulus. Choose an everyday situation that usually triggers tension, work, money, relationships, or expectations. When this situation arises, do not try to change the event. Observe the first emotional impulse that hits your body. Before acting, take a brief pause. Breathe deeply once just to interrupt the automatic pilot. Ask internally without rushing, what internal state do I choose to sustain while I handle this? Do not look for an ideal answer. Look for an honest one. Allow the action to come from this state, even if there is still some discomfort. The goal is not to eliminate reactive emotions instantly. It is to stop letting them run the show. Over time, the system learns that it is possible to navigate real situations without abandoning coherence. And when that happens, something transforms silently. The external life begins to reorganize, not because it was forced, but because it stopped receiving contradictory signals. The wagon moves on. In the next stretch of the journey, something even more subtle begins to reveal itself. There is a deep difference between sustaining coherence and fully trusting the field that forms from it. That is what begins to unfold next. The wagon moves through a region where the tracks seem steadier. The rhythm is constant. The noise that used to grab your attention is now barely audible, not because it disappeared, but because it stopped dominating your experience. This part of the journey marks a silent but profound transition. For a long time we confused control with responsibility. We believed that if things were working, it was only because we were hyper-vigilant, constantly scanning for risks, constantly correcting deviations. This pattern made sense in previous stages. It protected us. It organized the chaos. It prevented major damage. But there comes a moment when control stops organizing and starts compressing. The constant attempt to predict outcomes creates a rigid internal field. The mind stays active, the body stays alert, and the emotions never rest. Even when nothing is wrong, the system feels like something needs fixing. It is the micromanager archetype running your life. Trust emerges when this mechanism begins to unravel, not as blind faith, not as toxic positivity, but as a direct consequence of a system that is no longer at war with itself. Trusting does not mean abdicating responsibility. It means allowing responsibility to exist without continuous tension. The action is still there. The discernment is still active, but the impulse to strangle every variable loses its grip. This completely changes the experience of living. Instead of constant vigilance, you get broader awareness. Instead of anxious anticipation, you get clarity in the moment. Instead of the desperate need to guarantee results, you get the willingness to respond to whatever shows up. This state is not passivity, it is maturity. The quantum architect observes this movement with precision. He knows trust is not installed by intellectual conviction. It is established when the system recognizes through direct repetition that sustained coherence does not lead to collapse. Every time a situation is navigated without returning to panic, something adjusts. Every time a decision is made without artificial urgency, something stabilizes. Every time the body realizes it can relax without losing effectiveness, trust gets stronger. This process is cumulative. Gradually, control becomes unnecessary because the internal field becomes predictable. Not rigid, but stable enough to handle variations without losing center. This is where many report a curious shift. The external life still presents challenges, but they no longer occupy the same internal space. The problem is solved, but it does not spread. The tension appears, but it does not settle in. The emotion rises, but it does not hijack the system. This is not indifference, it is functional freedom. If this point in the journey is helping you see the difference between acting with control and acting with trust, consider subscribing to the channel. The previous videos prepared exactly this transition, and the next ones deepen how this trust becomes a stable daily state. The wagon moves on with the same firmness. In the next stretch, something even more refined begins to emerge. There is a moment when trust stops being a conscious choice and becomes the natural state of the system. That is what we start exploring next. The wagon now crosses a stretch where the movement is barely felt. Not because it stopped, but because it became stable enough to require no constant attention. Everything continues happening, but without the effort of monitoring that once seemed necessary. This is one of the clearest signs that something has changed structurally. Coherence stops being something you chase in a weekend workshop and becomes your baseline state. not as emotional perfection but as an internal organization that does not crumble easily under life variations. Here, a distinction must be made. Coherence does not mean the absence of intense emotions. It does not mean turning into a robot. It means that no single emotion takes over the command center. Everything can be felt but nothing dominates. When this stage begins to solidify, everyday life offers subtle but consistent signs. Consider a common scenario, a disagreement in a close relationship. Before the body would react instantly, the cortisol would spike. The need to explain yourself, defend your point, or win the conversation appeared automatically. Even when the dialogue ended, something remained reverberating for hours, sometimes days. Now the scenario is different. The disagreement still happens, the emotion still rises, but it does not hijack the system. There is enough internal space to listen, respond, and even disagree without losing presence. The body does not enter max alert. The breath does not fragment. The identity does not feel threatened. The conversation flows. The point is made. The boundary is held. And at the end, the system returns naturally to equilibrium. There was no repression. There was no white-knuckling to stay calm. There was simply enough coherence not to turn a 10-minute moment into a 3-day internal crisis. This is the sign that coherence stopped being a practice and became a condition. Jung would recognize here the real integration of what was once projected. Rogers would observe the congruence between experience and expression. Watts would remind us that nothing had to be pushed for the flow to continue. Peterson would see the capacity to sustain emotional responsibility without rigidity. Hélio Couto would perceive a field that no longer oscillates violently with every external stimulus. This stability does not come from a single decision. It is built by the compound interest of silent choices over time. Every time the system navigates a situation without returning to extreme alert, something real. Every time an emotion is felt without being fought or dramatized, something integrates. Every time a response emerges without urgency, something consolidates. Coherence gets stronger simply because it is no longer being threatened. At this point in the journey, something important happens. You stop constantly asking yourself if you are aligned. That question loses relevance because alignment no longer depends on continuous checking. It expresses itself naturally in how you act, decide, and respond. Life continues to present challenges, but they no longer require a complete internal reconstruction every time they occur. The wagon moves on. In the next and final stretch of this journey, something even deeper presents itself. There is a moment when the system not only sustains coherence, but begins to fully trust it. That is where the crossing is completed. The wagon begins to reduce its speed slightly. Not like someone preparing to stop, but like someone crossing a region where the movement no longer needs to be perceived. The sound of the rails becomes continuous, almost silent. Something has been stabilized. The quantum architect remains standing for a few moments, observing not just the path ahead, but the state of the passengers. There is less tension in the bodies, less expectation in the eyes, not because all answers were found, but because the need to search for them has ceased. This is the final crossing of this cycle. It does not mean the journey is over. It means the starting point has changed. Living from the field that was formed is to stop organizing life around constant corrections. It is allowing decisions, actions, and relationships to emerge from a stabilized internal state instead of being attempts to compensate for something that seemed missing. Problems continue to arise. Challenges continue to exist. The world does not become simpler. What changes is your relationship with it. The system responds without fragmenting. It acts without hardening. It adjusts without self-violence. This is a clear sign of emotional and conscious maturity. There is no euphoria. There is no sense of arrival. There is simply enough stability to sustain presence in the middle of impermanence. The quantum architect then turns to the passengers with a different attention. not to teach something new but to reveal something that only makes sense now. He explains that there is one last adjustment that consolidates everything lived so far. A simple exercise in form but profound in effect. A conscious repositioning of the field that over time has helped many people reorganize how they live, decide, and relate to their own life. It is not a miracle technique. It is not a shortcut. It is an internal turning of the key. If you perform this exercise with presence and honesty, something begins to align silently. And when this alignment happens, real changes start to occur without excessive effort. The invitation now is simple. Recognize and reposition the field. Allow yourself to cross this last step with full mindfulness. This is not an exercise to force change. It is an exercise to recognize where you are operating from and from there consciously reposition the field. This will help in any area of your life: relationships, prosperity, emotion, focus, spirituality. Whatever you project, bring to mind a current situation in your life that in another moment would have activated urgency, fear, or prolonged tension. Observe how you relate to it now. Do not look for perfection. Observe subtle differences. Maybe the reaction is shorter. Maybe clarity arises with less effort. Maybe the body returns to equilibrium more quickly. These signs indicate that something has already reorganized. Now make a conscious pause. Allow the body to find a comfortable posture. Bring attention to the breath for a few moments without trying to alter it. Feel the internal state present now exactly as it is. From this state, choose to reposition the field, not as a wish but as a direction. In a low voice or internally repeat with presence, day after day, my field organizes itself in a way that is increasingly clear, stable, and favorable to life. I have skills that allow me to overcome any challenge with balance and discernment. I am joyful, healthy, and I evolve continuously without harming or causing pain to anyone. People around me perceive my presence as a source of clarity, respect, and well-being. Remain for a few moments feeling the impact of these words in the body, not in the thoughts. Do not try to generate emotion. Allow coherence to adjust itself. This repositioning does not end the journey. It establishes a new starting point. From here on, every choice, every action, and every response emerges from the field you decided to sustain. The wagon does not stop. It follows, and now you are no longer traveling to find something. You are traveling from who you have become. The journey continues.